All right, so I wanted to introduce our panelists. We've actually got a great group today. These are people who know what is happening with WebRTC, both the standard and the implementations. The focus today is on standards. So if you're wondering about interoperability, if you're wondering about completeness of the standards, if you have questions that you weren't able to ask during the technical sessions, well, guess what? This is your chance now. They can't get away. They're right here in front of you. So the four panelists we have today are, first, Dan Druta, who's a principal member of technical staff at AT&T. He's actually been involved in the WebRTC work in IETF and W3C for a while now. He is the initiator of the push API specification, which is something that a lot of people don't even realize they need yet for WebRTC on mobile devices. So feel free to ask him about that if you have that interest. If you ask him what he likes to do in his spare time, I think he'll tell you that he likes to take photos with his camera, but he's being modest. He is a photographer. So feel free to catch him during lunch about that. So the next person on our panel is Colin Jonings. He is a fellow at Cisco, which is a quite significant role, I believe. Yeah,
That certainly since we'll get you a coffee.
Yeah, there you go. All right. So anyway, Cullen is one of the chairs of the IETF RTC Web Working Group. He's also one of the editors of the WebRTC specification in W3C. He also has a tremendous amount of experience with SIP and all of its related specifications, and is generally all around knowledgeable about IETF and every protocol that is communications related that comes out of there. The third person on our panel is Eric Scorla from Mozilla, also known as Ecker. What can I say about Eric? Well, Eric is, he's probably the strongest proponent for good security of the people who are working on WebRTC. So if you have any security-related questions, he would be a great one to ask about that. He also has a tendency to speak in a rate which is normal for him but fast for everybody else. So if you didn't understand him, okay, well, you can ask him to slow down. But anyway, he's great at getting information out there. All right, and the final person on our panel is Justin Uberty, who many of you have heard yesterday in the workshop. He is Google's team lead for the tech lead for the WebRTC team. He was previously the tech lead for Google Hangouts, so he has a tremendous amount of experience with applications that need to work properly using WebRTC. Justin, I understand, is also a fan of 80s music karaoke. So that's probably not a lunchtime conversation. That's probably an evening conversation. Feel free to ask him about that. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So what we're going to do today is I'll start off with a question, and then, next slide, please. OK, thank you. There's a lot on this slide. You don't have to be able to read it. This is a set of questions in case none of you come up with any. But from what I've seen so far in the sessions, I think that's highly unlikely to happen. So I'm going to start off with a question for the panel, and then we'll open it up to the audience. This really should be an opportunity for you to ask what you want to know from this panel. So I'm going to just start at the top. Basically, I think a broad question that would be good as a level set here, given that we have both business and technical people in the audience today, is why is WebRTC different? Okay, what makes it so special? What makes it different? And how would we know that it's successful at that? Anyone? Go ahead.
First, I don't know if the mic is on, and I guess it's not.
Yes, it's on. There you go.
Good. So I think the way we need to look at WebRTC is that a lot of people talk about embedded, real-time communications. I think more about it as blended user experience within your browser, because it gives you the ability to actually interact with the standard web elements and your real-time communication platform. I think this is what makes it so powerful, and we saw demos yesterday with manipulation of the video and the ability to actually do this with standard HTML and constructs. So I think that's what makes it so different as a platform.
You know, my point of view is any new platform always has a chicken and egg problem. The developers can't develop to it until it exists, and the people who are going to make it won't build the platform until there's a developer thing for it.
Just a sec, Mike's coming in.
Yeah. So on this one, we've really mics are not working well here today. What's really fundamentally different about this one is we've broken that whole cycle by simply having the developers. Simply having the browser vendors agree to build the platform before there was any applications of it, and we're seeing it built and available, and everyone can use it ahead of time. That really breaks the cycle and makes it easy for people to get it out there and then get deploying on it. And it's very different than any other type of technology release cycle I've ever seen before, where both sides need to sort of move together. Here, one side's just building everything the other side needs on faith, and the other side's going to take advantage of it.
I can see this is going to be me saying the same things as everybody else all day. I think Justin actually nailed this yesterday. What's different about this is it is a platform as opposed to being a set of applications. And so previously, whenever you wanted to do anything new in any kind of voice or video thing, you had to write a standard and have all the sides agree. And this is designed to enable new applications that we never even thought of without changing the web platform at all. And that's the hallmark of what made the web platform successful in non-real-time applications. And so this is about bringing that kind of flexibility to the application programmer to this to real-time as well.
Secondly, you have the ability to combine different things. You don't have to have a communications application. Communications can be a feature of existing web applications, of Yelp, of Amazon. And lastly, just the cadence. We're seeing, the applications can update really fast, but now even the browsers are updating every 6 weeks. So we have this platform now where the most innovative technology is always being put in the hands of users, and developers who are making web apps are now empowered to do that. I think that's a big difference from the historical model where things had 2-year, 3-year release cycles.
Thanks. Okay, so let's open it up to the audience. Wow, you're quick. All right, what's your question?
So basically, this just I'm trying to be devil's advocate, which is you're running this, you're providing a real-time communication in a browser. That means I'm not going to be online unless the browser is running. I go to the website, log in. So how is that going to be an added value versus running it, for instance, on an application that it starts out, it's running in the background, can have all these features and much more, can do video, audio, and all that. And you're not relying on your browser for your real-time communication. Like you mentioned email. Well, email is not really a real-time communication. Send an email, when you log in to see it, you can reply, still it's not a real-time communication. So it makes sense for a browser to handle your emails. But for your real-time communication, why is this an advantage to an application like the software?
So the question is, for something that runs in your browser, where you actually may have to go to where your browser is, log in, and so on, and actually in order to use it, how is that an advantage over, say, your soft phone or some application that's always live, always running? Colin?
My take on that is we're just going to see the world change where the browser is an application that's always live and always running. And when you log into your computer, it starts up in the background. You don't have a web page up, using sort of things like that, push notifications, it's still getting events and answers. But I think the real advantage is what Justin said, of it becoming a feature of applications. So on my computer, I have a ton of different things running that are voice communications. I have a soft phone, I have a video phone, I have a different phone, I have a WebEx. And what I really want is voice and video just to be embedded in whatever application I'm using at the time. So if I'm using Google Docs, why do I want to open a phone? I just want Google Docs to have the voice and video communications as a feature inside there. So I think as we move to that type of world, that being able to have lots of different things that you use to communicate with, all that have voice and video, really is where the direction we're seeing
else?
I'd just say, one of the other things is that, when the browser is your OS, which is one of the approaches that Google is taking, like there never is a case where you don't have a browser open. And I think some of the question of, well, we're seeing people live more and more in the browser, with, not only the things that we're doing with Google Docs and Google Gmail, but also people doing stuff with like Salesforce and Zoho and that kind of stuff. That the collaboration benefits of web applications are being more and more obvious to more and more people. And so, the fact that you wouldn't have a browser open, is less and less of a concern. And even in cases where you don't have a browser open, there are extensions being developed for HTML to basically allow things to run in the background. So you could get all the features of the soft phone, like, not having to have, a window in front of you, but still get that instantaneous alerting.
Okay, next question.
Sorry, but that's a desktop-centric point of view. On a mobile device, the browser is not going to start up or run in the background.
So the comment is that this is a desktop-centric point of view. On a mobile device, that isn't going to be the case.
See which one I have. I mean, that's certainly true in some cases, but if you look at something like Firefox OS, right, I mean, the browser is running as the thing that's running the phone. So, and I know that Android has a lot of similar kind of attitudes.
Right, and there's like C2DM, cloud-to-device messaging type things. Apple has theirs, Android has its own that can be used to basically trigger, invocation of web applications, or bridging to the web, based on these asynchronous things coming in from the cloud. I think that the mobile WebRTC on mobile is still very early days, but obviously it's an exploding market, and we need to make sure that it works great there too.
Okay, next question. Yes.
Still a data channel behind flags. Can you speak to some of the hurdles you're anticipating or the hang-ups there?
So data channel is still behind flags. Could you talk about some of the challenges there? And yeah.
So, I mean, as far as Firefox goes, the reason data channel is behind flags is that the entire implementation is behind a flag. So when the implementation comes on pref, so will data channels. So it's not a matter of data channels being specifically unstable. It's just a matter of the entire feature being not entirely finished.
And that's sort of the same situation for Chrome. Yeah, we have a bunch of the plumbing in there, but when we turn it on, we're going to want to put it behind a flag just in case we have any bugs in the software, which occasionally occur. We'll test flight it in like one version of Chrome, behind a flag, and if everything looks good, then we'll open it up to developers probably in the next release.
No anticipated bigger security issues there?
Do you anticipate any bigger security issues there?
Not really. I mean, the security, I think Justin mentioned yesterday, the security for data channels is basically the same DTLS security that we're expecting to have for the voice and video. So it's just the same. It's collinear.
It really doesn't open up any attack vector that you wouldn't already have with WebSockets. If sending data between the applications, like you can already do that with WebSockets. Data channels is just a more efficient way of doing so.
Okay, next question. Over here, okay, yes.
My name is Kevin, I'm from Atlanta. There are two questions about Codecs.
Okay, so he'd like to hear about Codecs and basically answers to the questions on the board. So which codec has the best business case? If vendors don't agree on at least one common video codec, will this fail? So I would actually amend that to say answer the second one, and then in the first one, just feel free to talk about codecs. I think, by the way, that we're largely talking about video codecs because most of the decision for the audio codecs has been made. Who would like to take this one?
I certainly have something to say.
Okay, go ahead, Colin.
So let's start on the second part of whether it'll fail. So let's go with the current assumption that two of the browser vendors right now, Mozilla and Chrome would prefer VP8, and Apple and Internet Explorer would prefer H.264. Those are the positions that have been publicly stated. If we ended up with a world like that, with the video streaming tag, this actually was a pain for the people who provided video content. It meant they had to provide, the server had to provide both formats, and the client could choose which format it went. So that's a slight hassle providing video, but it was workable. When we move to this peer-to-peer case, it's not workable. We're going to fail if that's the situation, because it means that 50% of the time, if you assume that those two camps have roughly 50% of the browser market share each, which is roughly accurate, right? 50% of the time, you're going to be calling somebody who doesn't have the codec you support, and you're not going to have any video at all, and that's going to be an unacceptable solution. So I think more than ever that we do need to have a common thing here. But on the which one has the best business case, there's a lot of factors that come into this. The way I look at video codecs is by just looking at what leading products will do that use both video codecs and see which ones the quality is better on that. And when we run the tests of that, I don't mind, send you guys links to some of our tests or whatever on that. We come out with basically we're seeing Apple FaceTime running at 768 looking better than Chrome running at 2 megabits. So it's a pretty clear-cut case. The real thing that I think will drive this over the long run is largely the hardware support and the backwards compatibility. Now, of course, I come from a background where that's sort of an important factor. So we see that going along with H.264 that direction. To some degree, we've seen this whole discussion play out before. It was the same thing on the video tag, and I think that it will take a similar amount of time and will play out a similar sort of way. If people will come down to about the same decision for the same reasons that they'd done on the video tag, which was H.264. So that's my long-term expectations of how this will go. And I know that the opinions on that across this group of people and across this room vary widely.
I think the perspective that we have at Google is that one of the reasons the web has been so successful is that nobody needed a license to stand up a web server. Nobody needed a license to create a web browser. And we think the same should be true. No one should need a license to create a WebRTC application. And as Christian's excellent talk this morning indicated, anybody who wants to license any non-trivial number of H.264 encoder decoder licenses needs to pay 20 cents per unit. And I think that's a real barrier to innovation. VP8 is what we consider to be the royalty-free option. If there was another royalty-free option, I think that'd be very interesting to consider. But as it stands right now, VP8 is the single sort of non-royalty bearing codec that is actually modern and as Christian's presentation showed, technically comparable in terms of performance and complexity to H.264. So if we have the thing of saying the same quality with or without royalty, or with or without royalty-bearing technology, I don't see why you wouldn't pick the one that was royalty-free. As I said, it's been amazing in the success of the web, and I think the same could be WebRTC.
Do I have it? Yeah. So try and take these, I think in reverse order as Colin did. I think it obviously is very important to have one common codec. I'm not sure I would say fail. If you think about it, you may have a couple soft phone applications, and you say, and you want to talk to somebody, and they're like, well, do you have Hangouts? Can you get on Hangouts, or can you get on Skype or whatever? So people do tolerate this kind of stuff, and it's no different to say, well, could you get yourself a copy of Chrome so we could talk, or Firefox or whatever. But that said, it's obviously better to have it just work out of the box. As far as what's the better option, obviously royalty-free seems like all other things being equal is dominant. That's a no-brainer, and obviously, as Colin said. So far, Mozilla has opted to ship VP8 rather than 64.
Yeah, so I think I'll start with the first one. What is the best in terms of the business? I think it depends on who you ask, and that's why it's such a bipolar discussion. But if it's going to fail or not, I think a lot of people don't realize that the mandatory to implement doesn't necessarily say that you shall implement only one and only one. And the other thing to point out is that there is some sort of a middle ground that could be explored in the sense that the actual web runtime obtain access to a properly installed, to be defined what properly installed, codec on the underlying platform and take advantage of it if it's existing. I think we're still kind of struggling to determine exactly what will happen if we don't come to a conclusion. But I think it may not fail, but it will definitely slow things down because you will not have the browser interoperability. And sometimes asking users to switch the browser to use a service is probably not a very good way to to entice them to use your application. And that's I think, what will happen.
Could you say a little bit more about properly installed codec?
Well, there is a risk associated with, you think about it as a plugin. People are very concerned about installing plugins because that's basically the door to a lot of viruses and potentially security-related issues. But if, for instance, the actual installation comes in a way that is not user-installed but is configured, either with the platform or with the way that the codec is installed, with it signed. We haven't explored this yet, but I think the mandatory to implement is one thing. Mandatory to be able to use what you have is something that we should also be considering in the long run.
So it made a lot of sense what other speakers said. I think the thing that will be interesting to watch is part of the reason the decision was delayed at IETF is we're hoping to find out more information about the royalty-free status and licensing status of VP8. So Google and Mozilla sort of requested delay of that decision, which makes sense to delay until we have as much information as possible. I think the other thing that will be interesting to watch is if no decision was made and some browsers were one way and some browsers were other ways, a browser that chose to do both would have a huge market advantage, and then it would be interesting to see what that would force the other browser vendors to do. So I think that'll all be interesting to watch as this plays out.
Yes?
So on this topic of codec, the discussion has largely been about browsers. Someone also mentioned we are going the mobile route pretty soon with this technology. Can you speak to how it will play out on the mobile platform, and in particular the codecs and the hardware support needed?
Right. So the question was, the discussion so far has been focused largely on browsers and codecs in browsers. Could the panel talk about codecs on mobile devices and whether perhaps this is different in some way? Do you want to start?
Okay. So I think that mobile brings a couple different challenges. The great thing about mobile is that the innovation on just overall chip speed has been so radical over the past few years that things where we've sort of said, well, we think we need a hardware encoder to do that in the past, we now say, well, we can really get good performance in software. And we're also starting to see VP8 stuff is shipping in hardware, like the Nexus devices that just came out have VP8 encoders and decoders built into hardware, and like the next refresh of various things, the TI OMAP series, will all have the VP8 hardware built into them. So I think we're going to get to kind of a level playing field of the hardware will be in place, probably for both codecs. But overall, I imagine that many applications will still choose to use software encoding because it allows them to do specific tuning and tweaking. Things like scalability will still only be offered in software. Many of these hardware codecs have very limited ability to do different prediction structures or different types of slices, that kind of thing. So as I see it, mobile ends up being kind of just like the desktop, but a couple years behind in terms of the performance factor, and people will end up doing whatever codec makes the most sense for their application. And if the WebRTC stack includes VP8 as mandatory to implement, they'll use that on mobile just as it would be on desktop. One thing people often mention is power. They say, oh yeah, using a software codec instead of the hardware codec, you're going to drain the battery. Well, if you're doing a video chat, you're running the screen full blast and the network full blast. And those two things between themselves are going to draw way more power than the CPU can do, even maxed out. So what we're seeing is that if you're using a software codec versus a hardware codec, the overall talk time difference ends up being less than 10%. So people just do whatever codec makes their application the best, and we think that will be VP8.
Colin?
So today there isn't as Justin said, there's chip support coming up. We're seeing some of the newer chips supporting both 264 and VP8, though those aren't really very prevalent yet, but obviously that will change somewhat over time. Today the bulk of stuff is 264. We do not imagine that we will see Apple devices implementing VP8 in hardware anytime soon. And we think that hardware encoding is going to remain incredibly important. And Justin's totally right of that the CPUs are getting faster and they can do more than they used to be able to do. But people are expecting more. All that happens is we just move up the resolutions and quality levels that are available. So I noticed that GoPro released their 4K cameras commercially available for very cheap in the last couple months. And you know, I mean, 4K video is coming and it looks awesome. It's really much nicer than that. So I think that that's one of the things that we'll just see as, yep, as you can do 640 on 480 on a common processor, that's not going to be the standard anymore. It's going to move to 720 and 1080 and 4K video. So I think that'll keep proceeding that way over time because people will like the user experience.
Eric, do you want to say anything? No? Dan?
No, I think both Justin and Colin pointed out some of the key aspects. The mobile environment is challenging, and I don't think anybody would argue that trying services, WebRTC services on a mobile environment where the standards are not even fully baked. Is a wide thing, especially when we have to deal with congestion, power, network utilization translates into power consumption, and those kinds of things. We're just getting started in talking about and getting to the point where things should mature and give us more opportunity to explore the mobile space.
Okay, any other questions? Yes.
Does Google have any plans supporting developers who try to use WebRTC outside of the browser, specifically on entry level?
Does Google have any interest in supporting developers who want to use WebRTC outside of the browser, for example, on the Apple platform?
Yes. Now, so I mean, like the whole sort of situation on iOS is a complicated one. That right now we ship a version of Chrome on iOS, and it looks sort of identical to its desktop and Android counterparts. But unfortunately, what has to happen is we end up using the browser engine that's included as part of the iOS platform instead of the actual Chrome browser engine. So we have the Chrome shell around basically Apple's mobile Safari implementation. So that kind of hamstrings a little bit of adding things like WebRTC. So we're trying to sort of make progress there, but we don't want to let that be our only sort of WebRTC strategy on iOS, and so we intend to support iOS developers who want to build native applications using WebRTC.
Actually, I'm just going to go ahead and ask. Is there anything else that any of you would like to say about support by Apple or participation by Apple? I should point out that for those of us who've been involved in the standards activities, there actually has been pretty much a noticeable absence of active participation by Apple. And I often get the question of whether that is significant. Does it matter? Is there anyone who'd like to comment on that?
You want to start? Yes. Okay. So I mean, yeah, I think that is a notable sort of absence, that especially compared to, say, Microsoft, who hasn't really showed their full hand about what they're doing with WebRTC, but has been extremely involved, in both W3C and ITF, in both the creation and feedback, and I assume the implementation of these APIs. But the thing is with Microsoft, they have an application that they really want to run on WebRTC. And I think my guess is for Apple, they're still trying to figure out sort of what is the real customer benefit of WebRTC for them, since they don't have as big of a web presence as some of the other browser makers. Understanding, are they going to make a web version of FaceTime? Are they going to try to have an open version of FaceTime? Steve Jobs talked about having an open standard for FaceTime over 2 years ago, but we're still sort of waiting for that. So I think it's not clear exactly how much they want to be part of an open platform. But who knows? Apple is just a lot of brilliant people there, and just very, they don't show their cards very, very much at all. So it could be that, what's happening around the engineering team just isn't percolating outside the organization.
So Dave Singer from Apple at the W3C meeting said, make no assumptions about what we're doing to respect to a certain comment he had around WebRTC. And I think that that's the thing you need to understand. We've got a whole range of browser vendors here, starting with Mozilla that does their dirty laundry in public, right? It's all there on the mailing list, like at one far end of the spectrum. And then Google operates many different ways, but on this type of stuff, they've been doing it very publicly and openly from the beginning for probably the browser as a whole and certainly some of this work. But it's still somewhat more closed than what happens at Mozilla. And then you have Microsoft that's sort of willing to reveal something about their business plans, but not as much. And then Apple, where we're not going to find out what they're doing until it gets announced on stage at WWDC, right? I mean, that's just the nature of the range of how those companies typically do business. And what we're seeing from all of them is, consistent with Apple's doing it. It's consistent with Apple's not doing it. You'd look about the same at this point in time. So I think it is very, very risky to make any assumptions about what exactly Apple's business decisions will be at this point in time. But they have been following the standard. They have people showing up at the workshops, the standards, the conferences. They're members of the working groups and things. It's not that they haven't been at all involved with any of this.
There's a question over there.
Anyone else want to comment before?
Yeah, I mean, like Colin said, I wouldn't read too much into this. I mean, I have no special knowledge about what's going on in Cupertino. But I mean, if you take other protocol standards, Apple's been way ahead in sort of TLS implementation. They're doing the very latest versions of TLS, and you see zero participation from Apple in the TLS working group. So my sense is that Apple does their thing, and they don't tell people about it until it's done.
Okay.
So this question, I think, requires a lot of honesty from all parties involved. Can you guys speak to what chain of events could kill WebRTC?
So the question is, what chain of events could kill WebRTC? And there's a
Or lack of adoption.
or lack of adoption, right? And
Agreement.
a plea for honesty here from the participants. Okay, Justin.
As Eric just mentioned, like if this room exploded, that would probably be pretty bad for it.
We got killed last night going to dinner.
So I mean, I think that one of the things that's come up is, WebRTC, mobile is exploding. Like the curve for how mobile devices are taking off, it's nothing short of extraordinary. And WebRTC, has, been initially focused on desktop. If we don't have, the other half of that, if you don't have that on mobile, I think that would be, something that would really end up hamstringing WebRTC. We're making huge investments to make sure that doesn't happen, though.
Eric. Actually, why don't we just go down the road? This will be the last question. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of a more expanded version of what Justin just said in the sense that.
By the way, can you hear Eric? He sounds quiet to me.
No?
No.
Okay, well,
Bring it in front.
Right. So, I mean, more generally, if we discover that none of the browsers can work with each other, or it looks like crap, then I think that would basically be very bad. And this is a feature. This is not like a feature where you roll it on your website and people use it or they don't. I mean, it's a feature where you need to have it's the square of the number of people who have it that dictates whether it works or not linear. So, if the initial versions really, really sucked and couldn't talk to each other at all, and that persisted for a while, I think that'd be very bad. And obviously, mobile's part of that equation. I think we now know from seeing some of the initial implementations that they're not going to totally suck. That talking to each other is more of an open question.
We've done a bit of analysis of this question, tried to make a risk chart on different things that go wrong, and by far the top runner risk for us is we see that the current patent war around mobile environments spills over into this, and a bunch of the large bunch of the large players of browsers sue all the other members of browser vendors, and all browsers are blocked from any forward progress or shipping anything new, is by far the highest risk that would seriously damage this. For the most part, we don't see that as very likely to happen, and we don't see a lot of things that are going to stop this at this point. It's somewhat inevitable.
I got. I'll be honest, too much can kill it. Too much love can kill it. And the reason that this is actually something that I would say differently in the context of, you know, having too much hype around it, too much expectation, and not proceeding, you know, properly with you know, building user communities' trust, and you know, providing interoperable solutions. Because at the end of the day, you don't want the technology. You want solutions that actually work. You want experience. You know, you don't want technology. So I think what we're doing, and Eric is actually leading a lot of the security-related stuff and the standards to make sure that, you know, this is a new territory for the browser, getting access to your camera, getting access to your microphone, and building that level of trust in the user community should make it take away. But you know, minimize the hype and back it up with real solutions is probably the thing that we need to look at. Thank you.
All right. All right. Thanks to all of you. Let's thank our panelists.